I kept my $37,000 monthly pay a secret from my fiancé. He only ever saw my simple lifestyle. He then asked me to dine with his parents. I planned to see how they treat a poor soul, pretending to be a ruined and naive girl, but the very second I walked into their home. Have you ever been judged so harshly, so quickly, that it actually made your blood run cold? Or wondered what the people you loved really thought of you, beneath all the polite smiles? What if finding out the truth meant unleashing a storm that would change everything? I'll never forget the look on Patricia Whitmore's face. It was this strange mix, like she'd just bitten into a lemon but was trying to look glamorous for a camera. Her eyes, those cold, assessing eyes, swept over my simple navy dress, my modest flats, my drugstore earrings. I could practically feel her calculating my worth and finding me completely lacking. Then, she leaned into her son, Marcus, my fiancé, and whispered something she thought was private. But I heard it, every single word. She looks like the help who wandered in through the wrong entrance. And in that exact moment, a chill ran down my spine, but a wicked little smile played on my lips. Because I knew this was going to be very interesting indeed. My name is Ella Graham, I'm 32, and for the past 14 months, I've been keeping a massive secret from the man I was supposed to marry. Not a small secret like eating the last slice of pizza and blaming the dog. Not even a medium secret, like still sleeping with a cherished stuffed animal from childhood. No, my secret was this. I make $37,000 a month. Before taxes, it's even more ridiculous. After taxes, still enough to make accountants do a double take and ask if there's been a mistake. I'm a senior software architect at one of the biggest tech companies in the Pacific Northwest. I've been coding since I was 15, sold my first app at 22, and I've been climbing that corporate ladder ever since. I hold 3 patents. I've spoken at international conferences. I have stock options that would make your eyes water. And Marcus? He genuinely thought I was an administrative assistant who could barely afford her rent. Now, I never actually lied to him. When we met at a coffee shop, he asked what I did, and I said, I work in tech. He nodded like he understood. Then he asked if I handled scheduling for the executives. I just smiled, gave some vague answer about supporting the team. He filled in all the blanks himself, and I just never corrected him. Why would I do something like that? Why would I let the man I was falling in love with believe I was struggling financially, when I could have bought his car 10 times over? Because a long time ago, the most important person in my life taught me a lesson I never forgot. My grandmother raised me after my parents passed away when I was 7. She lived in a modest house, drove an older car, shopped at regular grocery stores, and never wore anything flashy. She taught me to cook simple meals, to appreciate small pleasures, and never, ever to judge my worth by my bank account. What I didn't know until she passed when I was 24 was that my grandmother was worth several $1,000,000. She'd built a small business empire, invested wisely, and simply chose to live humbly because she believed character was more important than appearance. She left me everything, along with a letter I still keep in my nightstand. In that letter, she wrote something that became my guiding principle. A person's true character only shows when they think no one important is watching, when they believe you have nothing to offer them, when they think you're beneath their notice. That's when you see who they really are. So, when Marcus invited me to dinner at his parents' estate, hinting that this might be the night, mentioning his mother was very particular about first impressions, I made a decision. I would give the Whitmore family the test my grandmother had taught me. I would show up as the simple, unassuming woman they expected. Modest clothes, my old car. I'd speak humbly about my circumstances. And I would watch. I would watch how they treated someone they thought couldn't help them. Someone they thought was beneath them. Someone they thought had nothing to offer. And before you judge me, before you think I was being manipulative or deceptive, let me ask you, have you ever wondered what your partner's family really thinks of you? Had that nagging feeling the smiles were fake, the compliments hollow? Have you ever just wanted to know the truth, even if it might hurt? I wanted to know. I needed to know, because I wasn't just considering marrying Marcus. I was considering marrying into his family. And families, as my grandmother also taught me, are forever. Okay, deep breath. If you're hooked so far, please hit that like button and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It honestly means so much to me to connect with you all. Now back to this wild ride. The Whitmore estate was exactly what I expected. Yet it still surprised me with its sheer excess. The driveway alone was longer than some streets I've lived on. Gates of wrought iron with gold accents, because apparently, Regular iron wasn't pretentious enough. The lawn was manicured with a precision that made me think someone measured each blade of grass with a ruler. As I drove my 12-year-old Subaru up that pristine driveway, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. Simple makeup, hair in a low ponytail, my grandmother's small gold studs. The only jewelry I wore. I looked exactly like someone who didn't belong there. Perfect. Marcus met me at the door with a kiss that felt performative, like it was for an audience. His eyes flicked to my dress, my shoes, my lack of accessories. And for the first time, I saw something I'd never noticed in him. Embarrassment. He was embarrassed by me. I tucked that observation away for later. Inside, the house was a monument to new money trying desperately to look like old money. Crystal chandeliers everywhere. Oil paintings in gilded frames, though I noticed they were prints, not originals. The furniture was expensive but stiff, chosen for appearance over comfort. And there, in the foyer, stood Patricia Whitmore, like a queen surveying her kingdom. In her early 60s, with a face that had clearly seen several excellent surgeons. Her blonde hair was a perfect helmet, probably held in place with industrial-strength hairspray. Her dress was designer, her jewelry real, and her smile? Completely, absolutely fake. She extended her hand like she was granting an audience. I shook it. It was limp, dismissive, utterly devoid of warmth. Then came the comment to Marcus about me looking like the help, and I just smiled, pretending I hadn't heard a thing. The evening was just getting started. If I'd known what I was walking into that night, I might have worn armor instead of a navy dress. But then again, the best armor is information. And I had done my research. The Whitmore family owned a chain of car dealerships across 3 states. Not the flashy luxury brands, but respectable mid-range vehicles. Marcus's father, Harold, had inherited the business and spent 30 years expanding it. Patricia had married in at 23 and immediately began climbing the social ladder with fierce determination. They had 2 children. Marcus, my 34-year-old fiancé, who worked as a marketing manager for a company completely unrelated to the family business. A sore point for Harold, who expected him to take over. And Vivian, the 38-year-old older sister, who treated the family fortune like her personal piggy bank. I'd found all this through public records, social media, and some well-placed Google searches. I'd seen photos of lavish parties, society events, charity galas. I'd read articles about Patricia's philanthropy, though a closer look showed most donations came with significant tax benefits and publicity. None of this prepared me for Vivian in person. She arrived 20 minutes late, her signature move, I'd learn. Making an entrance was more important than respecting anyone's time. She swept into the living room in a dress that cost more than most people's monthly rent, diamonds dripping from her ears and neck. Her greeting to me? A single word, delivered with the warmth of a frozen fish. Hello. No, nice to meet you. No, Marcus has told us so much about you. Just hello. With a slight curl of her lip, like she'd smelled something unpleasant. I just smiled and said, hello back. She immediately turned to her mother, launching into a conversation that pointedly excluded me, discussing some charity event and whether the florist had been fired yet for last month's debacle. I stood there, holding the glass of water I'd been offered, feeling about as welcome as a vegetarian at a steakhouse. Marcus hovered nearby, looking deeply uncomfortable, but saying absolutely nothing. Observation 2 filed away. Harold Whitmore was a different creature. A large man, probably athletic in his youth, now comfortably settled into wealth. His handshake was meant to impress but felt tired. His eyes, though, were shrewd. I caught him watching me with something that might have been curiosity. There was another guest I hadn't expected. An older gentleman named Richard Hartley, introduced as an old family friend and business associate. Late 60s, silver hair, sharp eyes that missed nothing. When he shook my hand, his gaze lingered, a flicker of recognition. Did I know him? Had we met? I couldn't place him. He said nothing, but throughout the evening, I'd catch him staring with that same puzzled expression. Patricia led us into the dining room, decorated as if someone had an unlimited budget and zero taste. The table was long enough for a royal banquet. The chairs were upholstered in what I assumed was real silk. The place settings included more forks than I'd ever seen outside a restaurant supply store. I counted 6 forks per setting. 6. I've seen surgeries performed with fewer instruments. Patricia noticed me looking at the silverware and gave that frozen smile. She said she supposed I wasn't accustomed to formal dining, her voice dripping with false sympathy. I replied. My grandmother always taught me it's not the forks that matter, but the company you share the meal with. Patricia's smile tightened. Vivian snorted into her wine glass. Dinner began. The first course was some unidentifiable soup that probably cost more per bowl than my weekly grocery budget. Patricia used this time to begin what I'd later call the interrogation. She asked where I grew up. I said a small town in Oregon, which was true. Family? My grandmother raised me, also true. Parents? Passed when I was young. Patricia made a sound that was supposed to be sympathetic but sounded more like a drain unclogging. She said how difficult that must have been, growing up without proper guidance. I replied, my grandmother provided all the guidance I ever needed. Vivian leaned forward, her diamonds catching the light. What did your grandmother do for a living? She asked. She was a businesswoman, I said. Vivian's eyebrows rose. What kind of business? Small ventures, I replied. Nothing too exciting. The truth, of course, was my grandmother had built a company she eventually sold for several $1 million. But that wasn't the truth that would serve my purpose tonight. Patricia moved on. My current job? I work in tech. Are you a secretary? She asked. I'm more of a support role, I said. Patricia nodded knowingly, as if this confirmed everything. Oh, that's nice, she said. Every team needs support staff. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, but still he said nothing. And that's when Vivian decided to bring up Alexandra. Alexandra. The name dropped into the conversation like a stone into still water, sending ripples across the table. Vivian said it so casually, like mentioning the weather. I ran into Alexandra last week, she chirped. She's doing wonderfully, her family's business is thriving. I watched Marcus's face. Something flickered there, quickly hidden. Guilt? Nervousness? It was gone before I could place it. Patricia picked up the thread with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting for this exact moment. Alexandra has always been such a lovely girl, she gushed. So accomplished, so well suited to our family's lifestyle. She added, almost as an aside, she was Marcus's girlfriend for 3 years. Did you know that? I said I didn't. Patricia smiled. Such a shame when they parted ways. Everyone expected them to end up together. She explained that Alexandra's family owned an import company dealing in luxury vehicles, which would have been such a perfect match for the Whitmore dealerships. The implication hung heavy in the air. Alexandra was the right choice. I was not. I glanced around the dining room and noticed photographs on the wall behind me. I turned slightly. A gallery of family moments. Christmases, birthdays, graduations. And in at least 4 of them, a beautiful dark-haired woman stood next to Marcus. Her arm linked through his, her smile radiant. Alexandra. Patricia followed my gaze, saying nothing, her satisfaction almost palpable. Vivian twisted the knife deeper. Alexandra is still single, actually. Such a surprise no one snatched her up yet. Almost like she's waiting for something, or someone. I turned back to the table and smiled. She sounds like a remarkable woman, I said. This was clearly not the response Vivian expected. She blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. Patricia recovered first. Yes, Alexandra is remarkable, she said. Then with the subtlety of a sledgehammer, added, I just hope you won't feel too out of place in our world, given your more modest background. What do you mean, modest? I asked. Patricia's smile grew teeth. Well, I understand not everyone is born into certain advantages. Some people have to work ordinary jobs and live ordinary lives. There's no shame in being common. Common. She had called me common. Something shifted inside me. Cold, hard, not of anger. But I kept my expression neutral. I came here to learn the truth about these people. And the truth was becoming very clear. Marcus finally spoke up. Mom didn't mean anything by that, he stammered. She's just being protective. Patricia patted his hand. Of course I'm protective. A mother always wants the best for her son. The unspoken conclusion hung in the air like smoke. And you are not the best. Harold cleared his throat, trying to change the subject. He asked about my hobbies. Reading, hiking, cooking simple meals, nothing fancy. Vivian laughed. Oh, that's adorable. Like a child listing their favorite activities. Richard, the family friend, spoke for the first time. I think there's something to be said for simple pleasures, he mused. My own grandmother lived a modest life and was the happiest person I ever knew. Patricia shot him a look that could have curdled milk. Richard ignored her, looking at me with that strange, searching expression. "What was your grandmother's name?" he asked. "Margaret Graham," I said. Richard's eyebrows rose slightly, but he said nothing more. He just nodded thoughtfully and returned to his soup. The rest of dinner continued in much the same way. Patricia and Vivian took turns asking questions designed to remind me of my place, which, in their minds, was somewhere far beneath them. Marcus occasionally made weak attempts to defend me, but his heart clearly wasn't in it. Harold stayed mostly silent, watching with the tired resignation of a man who'd learned long ago that arguing with his wife was pointless. And through it all, Richard watched me. By the time dessert arrived, I had learned everything I needed to know about the Whitmore family. They were snobs of the highest order, measuring human worth in dollars and social connections. They saw me as an obstacle, a problem to be solved, a mistake Marcus had made that needed correcting. But I'd learned something else, something I hadn't expected. Marcus was not the man I thought he was. The Marcus I'd fallen in love with was kind, attentive, genuinely interested. But this Marcus, the one who sat at his mother's table and let her tear me apart without a word of real protest, he was different. Weaker. Someone who cared more about his family's approval than defending the woman he claimed to love. I wondered which one was the real Marcus. I was about to find out. After dessert, Patricia announced coffee in the sitting room. The men drifted toward the windows to discuss business. Vivian excused herself for a phone call. Patricia said she needed to speak with the housekeeper. This left me alone with my thoughts, and a perfect opportunity. I excused myself to find the bathroom. Marcus pointed me down a long hallway, lined with more pretentious artwork. I walked slowly, taking it all in. The house was impressive financially, but it felt cold, empty, like a museum, not a home. The bathroom was easy to find, but I wasn't really looking for it. I was looking for information, for understanding, for some clue to make sense of the evening. I found something much, much better. As I passed a partially open door, I heard voices. Patricia's and Vivian's. I stopped. Every instinct screamed to keep walking, to respect their privacy, not to eavesdrop. But something in Patricia's tone made me pause. Something sharp, urgent. I moved closer, staying in the shadows. Patricia was saying they needed to deal with the situation quickly. Marcus couldn't be allowed to make this mistake. Vivian agreed. She couldn't believe he'd actually brought me here. "I thought this was just a phase," she scoffed. "Like his vegetarian period in college," Patricia retorted. "This is more serious than a diet. This woman could ruin everything." My heart pounded. They were talking about me. Of course, they were talking about me. But what came next made my blood run cold. Vivian said the timing couldn't be worse. They need the merger with the Castellano family to go through. And Marcus needs to be with Alexandra for that to happen. Castellano. That was Alexandra's family name, the luxury car importers. Patricia agreed. "The dealerships are in trouble. We need the Castellano partnership to survive the next fiscal year." The floor shifted beneath me. The Whitmore dealerships were in financial trouble. I'd suspected something from my research, but this confirmed it. Vivian continued. Marcus was supposed to keep Alexandra interested while they worked out the details. That was the plan. Alexandra's family would invest in the dealerships, and in return, they'd get access to the Whitmore distribution network. Patricia confirmed Marcus had assured her he was keeping his options open with Alexandra. Options open. While he was proposing to me, I leaned against the wall, my mind racing. This wasn't just snobbery. This wasn't just a family who didn't like their son's girlfriend. This was calculated. Strategic. Marcus wasn't just weak. He was actively deceiving me. But for what? Why keep me around if Alexandra was always the plan? Vivian answered my unspoken question. Marcus is such a fool. He actually seems to like this little secretary. This nobody. She sneered. He was supposed to use her as a placeholder until the deal with Alexandra was finalized. But he's getting attached. Placeholder. That's what I was. Placeholder. A distraction. Someone to keep Marcus occupied while the family worked out their business arrangements. Patricia said they would handle it. They would make the engagement announcement tonight, get Marcus publicly committed to this girl, and then find a way to break them up before the wedding. Once Alexandra was secured, they would discover some terrible secret about me that would justify ending the engagement. Vivian asked, "What terrible secret?" Patricia's chilling reply, "We'll invent one if necessary." I stood there, frozen, listening to two women plan the destruction of my relationship as casually as planning a dinner party. And then Vivian said something that made everything even worse. At least the girl is too stupid to suspect anything. Marcus picked well in that regard. She's naive, trusting. Probably just grateful someone like Marcus noticed her at all. Patricia laughed. And agreed. I backed away from the door, moving silently. My hands were shaking, but not with hurt. With anger. They thought I was stupid. Naive. So desperate for love that I'd accept whatever crumbs they threw my way. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I found the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and looked in the mirror. The woman looking back was not broken. She was not devastated. She was thinking. I had come here tonight to test Marcus's family. They had failed spectacularly. But the test had revealed something I hadn't expected. Marcus himself was part of the problem. He wasn't just caught between me and his family. He was actively deceiving me. The question now was what to do. I could confront him. I could walk out there right now and expose everything I'd heard. Create a scene. Leave this house forever. But that would be too easy. Too quick. They'd dismiss me as emotional, dramatic, bitter. They'd tell themselves I was just proving their point. No. If I was going to respond to this betrayal, I would do it my way. On my terms. With a plan they would never see coming. My grandmother had taught me many things, but one lesson stood above all others. When someone underestimates you, they have given you a gift. The gift of surprise. Patricia and Vivian had just given me the greatest gift of all. They had no idea what I was capable of. I fixed my makeup, smoothed my hair, and walked back to the sitting room with a smile on my face. The game, I decided, was just beginning. When I returned, something had subtly changed. The furniture rearranged, the lighting adjusted. Patricia stood by the fireplace, a look of barely concealed anticipation. Harold near the doorway, looking uncomfortable. Vivian was pretending to examine a painting, but I caught her smirking at Marcus. And Marcus himself was in the center of the room, looking nervous. Too nervous. He turned when I entered, his face breaking into what was supposed to be a loving smile. He walked towards me, took my hands, and said he wanted to ask me something. I felt the trap closing. He said he knew we hadn't been together very long, and his family could be overwhelming, but he knew what he wanted. He wanted me, and then he got down on one knee. The ring he produced was large and flashy, exactly the kind Patricia would approve of. It was also, I noticed immediately, of questionable quality. The diamond cloudy, the setting uneven. The kind of ring that looked impressive in dim lighting, but would reveal its flaws in the harsh light of day. Much like the man holding it. Marcus asked me to marry him. Behind him, Patricia was beaming. This was clearly the plan. Step 1. Get Marcus publicly committed to me. Then dispose of me later. In the meantime, use the engagement to keep Alexandra waiting, dangling the promise of Marcus while they worked out their business arrangements. I understood all of this in the space of a heartbeat. I also understood I had a choice. I could say no. I could reject this proposal from a man who was using me, in front of a family who despised me. I could walk out with my dignity intact and never see them again. But that would end the story too soon. I thought about what I'd heard in the hallway. Their plans to invent some scandal about me. How they saw me as stupid, naive, disposable. And I thought about how satisfying it would be to show them exactly how wrong they were. So I said yes. Marcus slipped the ring on my finger. Patricia began clapping like she was at a theater performance. Vivian offered congratulations with all the warmth of a January morning in Alaska. Harold shook Marcus's hand, telling him he'd done well. Richard caught my eye from across the room. There was something in his expression. Something knowing, like he suspected this story had a few more chapters to go. I smiled at him. He smiled back. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of champagne and false congratulations. Patricia talked about engagement party planning. Vivian discussed venues. Harold awkwardly mentioned business opportunities that might arise from the union of our families. Clearly unsure what my family could possibly bring to the table. Marcus stayed close, playing the devoted fiancé with surprising conviction. If I hadn't heard what his mother and sister said, I might have believed it. But I had heard, and I would never forget. When the evening finally ended, Marcus walked me to my car. The night air was cold and clear. For a moment we just stood there. He asked if I was okay. He said his family could be a lot, but he promised they'd warm up to me eventually. I said I understood. I said I was just tired. He kissed me goodnight. I drove away from the Whitmore estate with his ring on my finger, and a plan forming in my mind. The next morning, I started my research. If there's one thing my job has taught me, it's the power of information. Data. Documentation. I spend my days analyzing systems, finding weaknesses, optimizing solutions. I was about to apply those same skills to the Whitmore family. And what I found over the next few days confirmed everything I'd heard. And then some. The Whitmore dealerships were in financial trouble. Not just a rough patch, but serious structural problems. They'd expanded too quickly, taken on too much debt, and now the bills were coming due. Their main franchise agreement was up for renewal, and the manufacturer was looking at other options. The partnership with Alexandra's family wasn't just strategic. It was desperate. But that wasn't all. As I dug deeper, I found something else. Something the Whitmores probably thought was hidden forever. Vivian had been embezzling from the family business. The amounts were small at first, hidden in expense reports and petty cash. But over the years, they had added up. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, siphoned off to fund her lifestyle while the company struggled. I printed out everything. Legal documents, financial statements, records of suspicious transactions. And then I started making phone calls. My grandmother's name still carried weight in certain circles. The business contacts she'd cultivated over decades remembered the Graham family with respect. When I reached out, they were happy to talk. One of those contacts happened to know Richard Hartley. And Richard, it turned out, had his own history with the Whitmore family. They had cheated him on a business deal years ago. Nothing illegal, just unethical enough to leave a bitter taste. He'd been waiting for an opportunity to even the score. I was about to give him that opportunity. The next few weeks were an exercise in patience and performance. I played the role of the happy fiancé with the skill of an award-winning actress. I attended family dinners at the Whitmore estate. I listened to Patricia's passive-aggressive comments with a smile. I watched Vivian flaunt her designer clothes and expensive jewelry, knowing exactly where the money had come from. And I watched Marcus. He was different now. Or maybe I was just seeing him clearly for the first time. The attentiveness I'd once found charming now seemed calculated. The compliments felt rehearsed. And his phone, which he guarded with increasing vigilance, buzzed with messages he quickly hid from view. I knew who was texting him. I'd seen the name flash across his screen more than once. Alexandra. One evening, I told Marcus I was working late. Instead, I parked near the restaurant where he was supposedly meeting a client. He wasn't meeting a client. He was meeting her. I watched through the window as they sat at a corner table, their heads close together, their body language unmistakably intimate. At one point, he took her hand. At another, she laughed at something he said and touched his face. I took photographs. Not because I needed evidence for any legal purpose, but because I wanted to remember this moment. I wanted to remember exactly who Marcus Whitmore really was. He wasn't just weak. He wasn't just a mama's boy. He was a liar and a cheat, actively maintaining two relationships while his family orchestrated the outcome from behind the scenes. The rage I felt in that moment was white-hot and purifying. But I didn't act on it. Not yet. Instead, I went home and added the photographs to my growing file. Richard and I had been meeting regularly, always in secret. He had his own documentation of the Whitmores' questionable business practices. He knew people who had been hurt by their dealings. He was more than willing to help bring them down. But he asked me why. He understood his own motivations, he said, but he wanted to know mine. Was this just about revenge? Or something more? I thought about his question for a long time before I answered. I said it wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. The Whitmores had spent their lives using their money and position to manipulate people. They treated anyone they deemed beneath them as disposable. They were raising Marcus to be the same way. And they would keep doing it to others long after I was gone. Someone, I said, needed to show them that their money couldn't protect them from consequences. Richard nodded slowly. Your grandmother would be proud, he said. That was the moment I knew I had made the right choice. The engagement party was set for 3 weeks later. The Whitmores were hosting it at their estate, inviting everyone who mattered in the business community. Patricia was treating it like a coronation, an opportunity to show off her perfect family to the world. She had no idea what was coming. I spent those 3 weeks preparing. I coordinated with Richard. I made strategic calls to industry contacts. I even reached out to the car manufacturer considering dropping the Whitmore dealerships. They were very interested in what I had to share. And then, the night before the party, I did one last thing. I gave Marcus one final chance to be honest. We were sitting in his apartment going over last-minute details. I asked him casually how he felt about us, about our future. He said he was excited, couldn't wait to marry me. I asked if there was anything he wanted to tell me, anything at all. He looked at me with those blue eyes I'd once found so charming. He said there was nothing. I was everything he had ever wanted. I asked about Alexandra. His face went pale. He recovered quickly, but I'd seen the flash of fear. He said Alexandra was just an old friend, nothing more. I nodded. I understand, I said. And in that moment I did understand. Marcus would never tell me the truth. He would lie to my face for as long as it served his purposes. He was his mother's son through and through. The next evening, I put on a dress from my rail closet. Not the modest navy number I'd worn to that first dinner. This was designer, elegant, worth more than everything Patricia was wearing combined. I looked at myself in the mirror and smiled. It was time to show the Whitmore family exactly who they had underestimated. The Whitmore estate was transformed. White tents dotted the manicured lawn. Crystal chandeliers hung from temporary structures, casting prismatic light across the crowd. A string quartet played classical music. Waiters in crisp uniforms circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more per bite than some people's hourly wage. Patricia had outdone herself. This wasn't just a party. This was a statement. I pulled up in my usual Subaru, watching the valets' expressions as they tried to reconcile my modest vehicle with the parade of Mercedes and BMWs. One of them actually asked if I was with the catering company. I just smiled and handed him my keys. The walk from the parking area to the main tent felt like a runway. With every step, I shed the persona I'd been wearing for 3 weeks. The nervous girlfriend, the grateful fiancée, the simple woman who should be thankful for Patricia Whitmore's grudging acceptance. Tonight I was Ella Graham, the real one. My dress was a deep emerald green, custom fitted by a designer whose name was whispered in fashion circles. My jewelry was understated, but unmistakable to anyone who knew quality. My grandmother's diamond pendant hung at my throat, a piece appraised at more than most cars cost. My watch was a limited edition, only 50 people in the world owned one. I had spent the past 14 months hiding who I was. Tonight I would stop hiding. The first person to notice me was a woman I didn't recognize, someone's wife or girlfriend. She looked at me, did a double take, then whispered to her companion. Both stared. I kept walking. The second person was Harold Whitmore. He was greeting guests near the bar, performing his duties as host with the tired enthusiasm of a man who'd rather be watching golf. When he saw me, his welcoming smile froze. His eyes traveled from my face to my dress to my jewelry and back again. Confusion replaced his practiced hospitality. "Good evening," I said. "Thank you for hosting such a lovely party." He stammered something about being glad I could make it, his eyes still trying to solve the puzzle I presented. I moved on before he could ask questions. The main tent held perhaps 100 guests, a carefully curated collection of business associates, society figures, and family friends. I recognized some faces from my research. The regional manager from the car manufacturer, several competing dealership owners, a journalist from the local business publication. And there, holding court near the champagne fountain, was Patricia Whitmore. She wore a cream-colored gown that had cost a fortune, though it was clearly off the rack despite her efforts to suggest otherwise. Her jewelry was impressive by normal standards, but unremarkable by the standards of true wealth. She was laughing at something one of her guests had said, her head thrown back in that practiced way that suggested she'd learned to fake amusement at finishing school. She hadn't seen me yet. I collected a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and made my way through the crowd, stopping to introduce myself to several guests. Each interaction followed the same pattern: confusion at my appearance, surprise when I mentioned I was Marcus's fiancée, renewed confusion when my dress, my jewelry, my manner didn't match whatever they'd been told about me. Word was spreading. I could see it in the whispers, the sidelong glances, the phones being subtly checked as people tried to figure out who I really was. Good. I finally reached Patricia's circle just as she was finishing a story about her recent charity work. She turned to greet the newcomer with her standard frozen smile, and then her face went through a remarkable transformation. First, confusion. Then, recognition. Disbelief. Then, something that might have been fear. She said my name like a question. "Good evening, Patricia," I said. "Thank you for throwing such a beautiful party." Her eyes were moving rapidly, taking in every detail of my appearance. The dress that cost more than her monthly household budget. The pendant that had been featured in a jewelry magazine. The watch she'd probably only ever seen in an advertisement. She asked where I'd gotten these things. Her voice carefully controlled, but unable to hide the tremor beneath. Just a few pieces I'd been saving for a special occasion, I said. Vivian appeared at her mother's side, summoned by some invisible distress signal. She looked at me, and her expression went through the same journey. Confusion, recognition, disbelief. But Vivian recovered faster. That dress is interesting, she said, dripping with false sweetness. Is it a rental? I told her the designer's name. I said he was a friend who had made it specifically for me. The designer's name hit Vivian like a physical blow. This was someone who dressed celebrities, who had a waiting list years long, who didn't make dresses for administrative assistants who could barely afford their rent. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. I excused myself to find Marcus. As I walked away, I heard Patricia hiss something to Vivian about finding out what was going on. I heard Vivian's confused response, saying she had no idea, that this didn't make any sense. I smiled to myself and kept walking. The first phase of the evening was complete. The seed of doubt had been planted. Now it was time to let it grow. Marcus found me before I found him. He emerged from a cluster of guests near the bar, face pale, eyes wide. He'd clearly heard the whispers, seen the looks, tried to reconcile the woman standing before him with the woman he thought he knew. "What's going on?" he asked. "Where did you get that dress? The jewelry? What is this transformation?" "I look like myself," I said. He stared at me, and I watched something shift behind his eyes. Not understanding exactly. More like the first crack in a wall that had been hiding an uncomfortable truth. He asked if we could talk privately. "Later," I said. "This is our engagement party, after all. We have guests to attend to." Before he could protest, I took his arm and steered him toward a group of business associates. These were the men and women who ran the automotive industry in our region. The people whose opinions actually mattered to the Whitmore dealership's survival. They had been watching my entrance with undisguised curiosity. I introduced myself properly this time. "Ella Graham," I said, giving my full name, and mentioned my position at my company. I watched their expressions change as they recognized the company name, as they realized who I actually was. One of them, a silver-haired man who ran a competing dealership chain, said he'd heard of me. His nephew worked in tech and had mentioned my name in connection with some innovative software solutions. "That's very kind of him," I said. Another guest, a woman who handled mergers and acquisitions for a major investment firm, asked if I was related to Margaret Graham. "She was my grandmother," I said. The woman's eyebrows rose. "Your grandmother was a remarkable businesswoman," she said. "The Graham name still carries significant weight in certain financial circles." I could feel Marcus tensing beside me. He had no idea what any of this meant. He had never asked about my family beyond the most superficial questions. He had assumed poor meant unimportant, and he'd never bothered to look deeper. His mistake. The evening continued, and with each conversation, the truth spread further. People were talking, checking their phones, confirming details. The narrative was shifting beneath the Whitmore's feet, and they didn't know how to stop it. Richard arrived about an hour into the party. He found me near the rose garden, momentarily alone while Marcus was pulled away by his father for some urgent conversation. "The manufacturer's representative is here," Richard said. He was very interested in the documentation I shared with him earlier. I asked if he was ready. Richard's eyes glinted. "I've been ready for years." We talked for a few more minutes, finalizing the details. Then Richard melted back into the crowd, and I returned to my role as the happy fiancé. Patricia found me next. She had regained some composure, but I could see the strain around her eyes. She pulled me aside, her grip stronger than necessary, and demanded to know what I was doing. "What do you mean?" I asked. "You know exactly what I mean," she hissed. "The dress, the jewelry, the stories you're telling people about your grandmother and your job. What is your game?" "There's no game," I said. "I'm simply being myself." "That's impossible," she snapped. "Marcus told me about your circumstances. You're a secretary who lives in a studio apartment and drives a car that belongs in a junkyard." "Marcus made certain assumptions," I corrected her softly. "I never actually told him those things. I said I worked in tech, which is true. I said I had a support role, which is also true, as architects support the development teams. I never claimed to be poor. I simply never corrected your assumptions." Patricia's face went very still. Why? She whispered. I looked at her directly. My grandmother taught me that a person's true character only shows when they think no one important is watching. I wanted to know who the Whitmore family really was. I paused. Now I know. Before she could respond, the string quartet stopped playing. Harold Whitmore's voice boomed over the speaker system, announcing it was time for the official toasts and speeches. Patricia looked at me with something that might have been fear. I smiled and walked toward the stage. The main event was about to begin. The stage had been set up at the far end of the tent, decorated with flowers and soft lighting that was probably meant to be romantic but felt like a spotlight waiting for its moment. Harold stood at the microphone, welcoming guests, thanking them for celebrating this special occasion. He talked about family, tradition, strong partnerships in business and life. His eyes kept darting to Patricia, who was making her way through the crowd toward the stage with the determination of a general approaching a battlefield. She reached the microphone just as Harold finished. She took over smoothly, her composure firmly back in place, her smile as frozen and perfect as ever. She was so pleased to welcome everyone to this celebration of her son's engagement. Marcus had found himself a wonderful young woman, someone who would be a perfect addition to the Whitmore family. She spoke of exciting plans for the future, plans that would ensure the Whitmore legacy continued for generations. Then she began to hint at business opportunities, growth, expansion, new partnerships, strategic alliances. The Whitmore dealerships entering an exciting new chapter. I watched the manufacturer's representative shift uncomfortably. I saw Richard catch his eye and nod almost imperceptibly. Patricia was building toward something. She was using this engagement party as a platform for a business announcement, probably related to that Castellano merger. She called Marcus to the stage. He climbed the steps, looking nervous despite his practiced smile. He stood beside his mother, looking out at the crowd, searching for me, his expression complicated. Patricia said there was one more person who should be on this stage. She wanted to welcome her future daughter-in-law, the woman who had captured her son's heart. She said my name. The crowd turned to look at me. I set down my champagne glass and walked toward the stage. The tent was silent except for my footsteps. Every eye was on me. The whispers had done their work. Everyone knew something was happening, that this engagement party was about to become something else entirely. I climbed the steps and stood beside Marcus. He reached for my hand, but his grip was uncertain, questioning. Patricia handed me the microphone with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She said she was sure I wanted to say a few words. I looked at the microphone in my hand. I looked at Marcus. I looked at Patricia, who thought she was in control. I looked at the crowd, filled with people who could make or break the Whitmore family's future. Yes, I said. I did want to say a few words. And then I began. I want to thank Patricia for the warm welcome she's given me. I began, my voice clear, cutting through the silence. And I want to acknowledge the Whitmore family for showing me exactly who they are over the past few weeks. Patricia's smile flickered. When I first came to this house, I made a decision. I decided to let the Whitmores see a simple version of me. A woman without expensive clothes or impressive credentials. A woman they might consider beneath their notice. The crowd was utterly silent. I wanted to see how they would treat someone they thought couldn't help them. Someone they thought had nothing to offer. Someone they thought was, in Patricia's words, common. Patricia's face went white. What I found, I continued, was illuminating. I described the dinner, being compared unfavorably to Marcus's ex-girlfriend. The whispered insults Patricia thought I couldn't hear. Being called the help, common, a gold digger, by people who knew nothing about me. Marcus was staring at me now, his face a mask of horror. And then I heard something I wasn't supposed to hear. I said. I described the conversation in the study. Vivian and Patricia discussing how to remove me from Marcus's life. I described learning that I was just a placeholder. Someone to keep Marcus occupied while the family arranged his real future with Alexander Castellano. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I discovered the Whitmore dealerships are in serious financial trouble, I stated. I learned they are desperate for a merger with the Castellano family to survive. I found out that Marcus has been keeping his options open with Alexandra the entire time we were together. I pulled out my phone and showed a photograph. Marcus and Alexandra at the restaurant holding hands across the table. This, I said, was taken 2 weeks ago, while Marcus was supposedly working late. The crowd erupted in whispers. Marcus grabbed my arm. This isn't what it looks like, he pleaded. I can explain. You already explained, I said, my voice steady. I gave you the chance to be honest last night, and you chose to lie. I turned back to the crowd. There's more. The tent was completely silent again. Every person understood they were witnessing something unprecedented. The comfortable rules of society had been suspended. The masks were coming off. I've spent the past few weeks researching the Whitmore family business, I announced. I found some interesting things. I mentioned the financial records, the overextended credit, the declining sales, the franchise agreement about to be terminated. Harold Whitmore's face had gone gray. I also found evidence of something more serious. I looked directly at Vivian, who was standing near the back, frozen like a deer in headlights. Vivian Whitmore has been embezzling from the family company for years, I revealed. The amounts started small but have grown over time. The total is now in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Vivian's husband turned to look at her, an expression of pure shock. That's a lie, Vivian shrieked. She has no proof. She's just a bitter woman trying to destroy our family. Richard stepped forward from the crowd. He has proof, he said. He walked toward the stage, carrying a folder I knew contained years of documentation. Bank records, expense reports, transaction histories. Everything needed to prove exactly what Vivian had done. He handed the folder to the manufacturer's representative, who had moved closer, looking like a man whose worst suspicions were being confirmed. I've been waiting a long time for this moment, Richard said. The Whitmores cheated me on a business deal 15 years ago. I never forgot. When Ella approached me with evidence of their current misdeeds, I was happy to contribute what I knew. Patricia found her voice again. This is outrageous. You have no right to make these accusations. I'll sue you for defamation. You're welcome to try, I said. Everything I've shared is documented and verifiable. The financial records are public information, available to anyone who knew where to look. And the evidence of Vivian's embezzlement has been compiled from sources that will hold up in any court. I looked at Marcus, still standing beside me, looking like a man whose entire world had collapsed. There's one more thing, I said. I reached up and removed the engagement ring from my finger. The cloudy diamond caught the light, revealing all its flaws. I will not be marrying Marcus Whitmore, I declared. I never intended to, not after I learned the truth about him and his family. The only reason I said yes to his proposal was to give them enough rope to hang themselves. I handed the ring back to Marcus. You should give this to Alexandra, I said. She's clearly the one you actually wanted. Marcus's face crumpled. That's not true, he choked out. I have feelings for you. The thing with Alexandra was just business. Something my mother arranged. And that's exactly the problem, I said, my voice hardening. You let your mother arrange your life, your relationships, your future. You never once stood up for me when your family attacked me. You lied to my face about Alexandra even when I gave you the chance to be honest. A man who can't be honest with the woman he claims to love is not a man I want to marry. The crowd was absolutely silent. I turned to face them one final time. I am Ella Graham, I said. I am a senior software architect who built a career through hard work and integrity. I make more money in a month than most people make in a year. And I live simply, because my grandmother taught me that wealth is not the measure of a person's worth. My gaze swept over Patricia and Vivian. The Whitmores have shown me their true character. They revealed themselves as people who judge others by their bank accounts and social status. They treated me with contempt because they thought I had nothing to offer them. And that is the kind of character that will eventually destroy them, with or without my help. I set the microphone down on the podium and walked off the stage. The crowd parted for me like water. No one spoke. No one tried to stop me. Behind me, I heard the chaos begin. I didn't look back as I walked through the tent, but I could hear everything. Patricia's voice, high and desperate, trying to salvage the situation. She was saying there'd been a misunderstanding, that I was clearly disturbed, that none of what I said was true, but the damage was done. I could hear the manufacturer's representative speaking into his phone. His voice clipped and professional. I could hear other guests murmuring, some already heading for the exits, wanting to distance themselves from the disaster. I reached the edge of the tent and paused. Vivian had cornered her husband near the bar, trying to explain, trying to justify. His expression was stone. He was looking at her like he'd never seen her before, like the woman he'd married had been replaced by a stranger. Harold was slumped in a chair, his head in his hands, the patriarch of the Whitmore Empire, brought low by the exposure of secrets he'd probably suspected but never wanted to acknowledge. And Marcus was standing alone on the stage, the rejected ring still clutched in his hand. He was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Anger? Grief? Regret? It didn't matter anymore. I walked out of the tent and into the cool night air. The stars were bright overhead, indifferent to the human drama playing out beneath them. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that felt cleaner, somehow lighter. Richard found me by the fountain a few minutes later. "It's done," he said. "The manufacturer already made the call. The Whitmore dealerships will lose their franchise agreement by the end of the month." I asked if he felt satisfied. "Satisfaction isn't quite the right word," he replied. "It feels more like relief, like a debt finally paid." I understood what he meant. He asked what I would do now. "I'll go home," I said. "I'll sleep well for the first time in weeks. I'll wake up tomorrow and continue building the life I've created for myself. The life that has nothing to do with Marcus Whitmore or his family." Richard nodded. "Your grandmother would have been proud of you tonight," he said. I felt tears prick at my eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. "I hope so," I whispered. He handed me a business card. "If you ever need anything, call. I owe you one." I tucked the card into my purse and thanked him. Then I walked to the valet station, collected my old Subaru from a very confused attendant, and drove away from the Whitmore estate for the last time. In my rearview mirror, I could see guests streaming out of the tent, the party dissolving into chaos. Patricia gesturing wildly, still trying to control a narrative that had slipped completely beyond her grasp. I turned my eyes back to the road and didn't look again. The drive home was quiet. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. I just drove, letting the miles put distance between me and everything that had happened. When I finally reached my modest apartment, I sat in the car for a long moment before going inside. I thought about Marcus, about the man I'd believed he was and the man he'd turned out to be. I thought about how close I'd come to marrying him, to binding my life to his, to becoming part of a family that would have treated me with contempt forever. I thought about my grandmother, and the lesson she had taught me about character and worth. And I thought about the future, my future, the one I would build for myself on my own terms with people who valued me for who I was, rather than what I could give them. I got out of the car and went inside. My apartment was small and simple, just the way I liked it. I made myself a cup of tea, changed out of my designer dress, and sat by the window in my old, comfortable robe. The city lights sparkled below me, thousands of lives playing out in thousands of windows. I was just one of them, nothing special, nothing extraordinary, and that was exactly how I wanted it. 1 week later, I was sitting at my kitchen table with my morning coffee when my phone buzzed with a news alert. The headline read, "Whitmore Automotive facing closure after franchise termination." I read the article slowly, absorbing the details. The manufacturer had officially ended their partnership with the Whitmore dealerships, citing concerns about financial management and ethical practices. Without the franchise agreement, the dealerships couldn't sell new vehicles. Without new vehicle sales, the business couldn't survive. The article mentioned that several former business partners had come forward with their own complaints about the Whitmore family's practices. It mentioned an internal investigation had revealed financial irregularities, now being reviewed by authorities. It mentioned Vivian Whitmore had been asked to step down from her position pending further inquiry. It did not mention me. I had asked Richard to keep my name out of it, and he had honored that request. The story would be about the Whitmore's own misdeeds, not about the woman who had exposed them. I didn't want fame or recognition. I just wanted the truth to come out. And it had. I finished my coffee and looked around my small kitchen. The same kitchen I had been sitting in a month ago, when I first drove to the Whitmore estate. The same kitchen where I'd made the decision to test them, to see who they really were beneath their polished surface. So much had changed since then, and so much had stayed exactly the same. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Marcus. He said he needed to see me. He could explain everything. He'd made mistakes, but he still cared about me. He asked if we could meet for coffee, just to talk. I looked at the message for a long moment. Then I deleted it without responding. Some doors, once closed, should stay closed. I stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the morning sun rising over the city. It was going to be a beautiful day. A day for new beginnings, for moving forward, for building something better. My grandmother's pendant hung at my throat, warm against my skin. I touched it gently, thinking about the woman who had taught me everything I knew about character and worth. She had lived her life simply, not because she had to, but because she understood that the things that truly matter can't be bought. Love, integrity, self-respect. The knowledge that you have acted according to your principles, even when it would have been easier to compromise. The Whitmores had thought they could buy their way through life. They had believed that money and status made them better than everyone else, entitled to treat people however they wanted without consequences. They had been wrong. I turned away from the window and got ready for work. My regular job. At my regular company. Doing the work I loved, with people who respected me for my skills and character, rather than my bank account. The story of the Whitmore family would continue to unfold in the coming weeks and months. There would be investigations and legal proceedings, consequences and repercussions. The empire they had built on a foundation of arrogance and deception would crumble piece by piece. But that was their story now, not mine. My story was just beginning, and it would be written on my own terms, in my own words, according to my own values. That was the lesson my grandmother had taught me. That was the truth I had carried with me through every moment of the past month. A person's worth isn't measured by their bank account, or their social status, or the opinions of people like Patricia Whitmore. It's measured by their character, by the choices they make when no one is watching, by the way they treat people who can't do anything for them. The Whitmores had failed that test completely, and I had finally found the answer I had been looking for. The answer was that I didn't need their approval. I didn't need Marcus's love. I didn't need anyone's validation to know my own worth. So, tell me, what would you have done in my shoes? Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against people who underestimated you? Let me know in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious to hear your thoughts.